have three guests, all looking to shine a light on the unseen, the suppressed, the extraordinary, the energies that go beyond this universe, but also within. Not everyone has the same experience, but we can learn a bit from each guest. Start off with today's guest, Mary Joyce, who has worked for two major metropolitan newspapers, the Orlando Sentinel in Florida as an artist and columnist, and the Oakland Press in Michigan as a Sunday magazine editor and then feature editor. Since 2008, she has been the main researcher and editor for the Sky Ships Over Cashiers website, which features a wide variety of cutting-edge topics from UFOs to secret underground bases, from Bigfoot to Cherokee little people. She has interviewed people with high top secret clearances and clandestine government activities. Her most recent book, Spy in the Sky: Secrets and Cover-Ups in the Earth and Beyond. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Okay. Andy Thomas, Truth and Mysteries author and researcher. Andy Thomas is one of the UK's best-known researchers into conspiracies, unexplained mysteries, and cover-ups, and is the author of many books, including his current title, The New Heretics, as well as Conspiracies, The Truth, Agenda, and Others. Welcome, Andy.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Dr. Irena Scott, author and physiologist, received her Ph.D. from the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine, employed by the Defense Intelligence Agency, level GS-11 research in satellite photography, including the Air Order of Battle section of its Photographic Interpretation Office, which involved aircraft identification with above top secret service compartment information clearances. She has served on the MUFON Board of Directors from 1993 to 2000. Her most recent book, Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, The Pascagoula Abduction. Welcome, Irena.
Thank you for asking me here.
Yes. Okay, so now that I got all that information out, we can all agree upon the fact that there is certain information or certain situations that exist today that have a sense of cover-up or a sense of things not really appearing as they really are. And before we just get into that a little bit, which we'll focus it on, maybe each one of you can just share a little bit about how you became interested in the topic that we're discussing today, as UAPs, UFOs, and other clandestine, situations that take place. Mary, would you like to start?
Sure. At one time, I lived between Cocoa Beach on Patrick Air Force Base and the Mission Control Center at the Kennedy Space Center. And I got to meet a lot of NASA people. I got to see UFOs flying over Florida, and that's really where it started. Then I moved to the mountains of Western North Carolina, and it's a hot spot for all sorts of activities, UFOs and Bigfoot and little people and underground bases. So I've been kept quite entertained.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, Andy, would you like to share?
Well, I'm here in the southeast of England, and my journey into the world of discovering that mysteries and cover-ups are going on everywhere began with the crop circle phenomenon. And, it's much ridiculed, it's much laughed at, but I got involved in 1991 and soon realized that whatever you thought the answer to it was, the mainstream media was not telling the truth. It was definitely misrepresenting it. I still believe that today. And of course, that then starts you down a journey of, well, if they're misrepresenting something as basic as lovely patterns in the fields, what else are they misrepresenting? And that's when I became involved with other people looking at the rest of the world and discovering that nothing is ever communicated to us straight, and that there's layer upon layer of unexplained things and things that quite clearly we are not supposed to know, which of course has made me all the more interested. And as a result, I've spent the last few decades giving lectures, writing books, trying in my own small way just to show people there is something much bigger going on here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Irena?
Well, I've been in science my whole life, and so I've been in the UFO closet for most of my life. But it started when my sister and I were real young, with something flying around our bedroom. We had never heard of UFOs at the time, but it was weird. And then we had several sightings and close encounters, some with each other. And then I worked for the DIA, and I thought there were some funny things happening there. But I didn't come out of the closet until I was close to retirement age. And since then, I've been interested in writing books and things.
Yeah. I mean, each one of you has a profound, I would say experience, but more so a profound situation or subject that was covered up. And I'm sure as an individual, not only as a researcher, there's something that would pique your interest in terms of having a greater interest in that area. So for Mary, is there a specific cover-up or a bunch of cover-ups that maybe you can discuss that you've researched that has drawn interest?
I found a whole bunch of them, but let me talk about the one I'm the most excited about, and that's been the one I just finished doing the research on. I started using Google Earth to look for convincing signs of an ancient civilization on Mars. What I found instead was UFOs and evidence that both aliens and American astronauts are on Mars now. And so I put it all together. I mean, it took a long time. I didn't find all this stuff overnight, but it's pretty incredible, the things that I found on Mars. So I guess that's what I'm most excited about now, because everybody thinks that we're going to be on Mars in the future. I am convinced that we already are there.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the work you've done on the cover-ups in terms of Google's information, and then after it's been exposed or people, I guess, certain amount of hits have been made on that particular site, is a cover-up that actually, a physical cover-up that actually takes place.
I have both the stuff that I found right away, and I also caught them covering things up. So I have a love-hate relationship with Google. It's enabled me to find some incredible things, but they have been real quick to cover things up after I've posted them on the website. One example was I found something that looked like a cluster of walled buildings on Mars. As soon as I posted that, it's like somebody went in there and put a photographic strip on the moon and put it on half of it, and they blurred the other half. So I was able to survive, save the before and after shots, so people can see the kind of things that are done to keep us from knowing what's going on. And they've done that to a lot of things that I've posted.
Yeah. Andy?
The famous they.
Yeah. Andy, do you have any insight into your experiences with cover-ups, or in terms of crop circles and the like?
It's pretty obvious that anything that falls outside the standard orthodoxy, authorities do not want the public to be talking about it. Now, whether they have a nefarious purpose or a good purpose, you can argue that one round, but the reality is that they do not want people talking about strange things. And as we've just heard there, and I can back that up completely, you say the wrong thing, you put the wrong thing online now, especially, and it will be taken down almost immediately. And I'm not just talking stuff here that is considered extreme. We're talking stuff that is just intriguing, that should be looked at. And certainly in my own experience, I've had lectures taken down off of YouTube for no clear reason that I can find. A warning comes up saying you have violated the policy. Well, they don't tell you how you violated it. So you're always left not really knowing what it was you said that they didn't like. So we see this all around us. And yeah, I've seen evidence myself of like pictures of Mars, orbital photographs and that have plainly been very crudely photoshopped so that you can't see what's underneath what they've layered on top. I have seen that for myself, and I've also seen a lot of that kind of information vanish over the years. And of course now we're in a world where suddenly you've got the US Congress actually having hearings about UFOs, UAPs, and you're getting quite high-ranking people coming forward saying, no, there is a cover-up here. So I don't know how long they can hold this all down. There are, of course, many people that are very suspicious about the motivations for why that is now going a little bit more public. But either way, what we're finding is they are now admitting there have been huge cover-ups for a long time about the possibility of life elsewhere, the possibility of ancient lost civilizations and so on. It certainly seems to me that they know that there is much more going on, but of course they do not want the public to know, so they ridicule, they belittle it, they take it away from public view. And that's something I've experienced myself through years of crop circle research, conspiracy research. We do not live, I'm afraid, in a very free world, much as they like to tell us that we do.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Irena, would you like to?
Well, one time the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, is in the news quite a bit with UFOs now and their videos and things. And I worked for it before that. But one of my job positions there was to identify aircraft from satellite photography. And I remember one time my supervisors found what looked for all purposes like a UFO. And there were 2 photographs of it, so you could see it in stereo and everything. Well, they reported it to their supervisors, which I think were in the CIA, and their supervisors told them that it didn't exist. It was a spot on the film. Well, these were the top photogrammetrists and photo interpreters there were, and in the DIA, and their supervisors were telling them that they didn't know what they were talking about. And they'd never had anything rejected before either. But I saw the photographs, and you could definitely see it in stereo, and there hadn't been anything reported like it at that area. So it looked and then the supervisors sent it to some other authorities, and who said it wasn't a spot on the film. And of course it wasn't, because it was on 2 pictures. But that seemed like something pretty weird, and my supervisors thought so too.
Let me just throw something in here for people who are listening. There is a print screen button on your computer. So if anybody finds something that's very interesting, hit the print screen and save it, because those things, you might not see them again. And if we save those things, then we will have evidence that we can show other people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've come into contact with a few people who've had their own encounters. And in terms of expressing the information to many people are not in the mindset to let go of the handrail, so to speak, in order to take on new information and to digest it. One of the interesting things that this shaman, who was in his mid-70s, and he spoke about, and I bring up his age because of the wisdom he has and his experience of when the information came about. He expressed being in the Amazon, actually, as I think a business person, and he was told that he had to leave that job and go to this meeting. And in the Amazon, this mothership landed, the size, he said he couldn't describe it, actually, that's how big it was, and was passed information about our current situation and the actual spiritual war that exists from different universes that are taking place right now, between, I don't know if you want to call them reptilians, bad aliens versus a good alien type of war itself. But he said that was what was happening now, and the manipulation of government officials in terms of who had the ability to be manipulated was being manipulated to either suppress the information or to create the agenda that exists right now. He was taken on a ship, he told me, to the underground of the earth where the civilizations existed right now. And so for me, hearing this information and hearing this type of background noise that we somewhat hear in the media in terms of exposing or retracting information is very interesting. Does anybody have any thoughts specifically on why the information is being suppressed? More specifically, other than as a general feeling?
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, I was just going to make the point here that one of the problems that we've got is that we never truly know the motivation of a cover-up. There's many reasons why. Let's say there is an alien force and it's here. It is more advanced than us, which is, of course, the general belief of many people. If that is true, that will shock many people. We're used to talking about this. we're used to thinking about this. That's not such a big thing for us. But I certainly can think of many people where if it was announced there is a superior power there that could do things like shut down our nuclear bunkers and missiles, which we know they can from all the reports, that's frightening to some people. And immediately our authorities have lost a level of power, because what they're saying is they are not the ultimate power. There is something above them. So the minute they announce it, they've got that problem. And I would imagine they're then very worried about losing their authority by doing that. You've also got the issue that we see, you know, even now, officially released footage of these craft, the tic-tac, you know, square boxes inside spheres and all of this we hear about. They are doing things that are not known technology. And whether you think they're alien or, as some have tried to argue, a foreign military power, whatever that means, what that says is that the entire economy that we have based on oil and all the old energy forms is over. That something has got something that leaves all that behind. And of course, that would mean economic collapse ultimately, if suddenly everybody wanted to get hold of that information. So you've got those aspects that there might be a genuine concern that, you know, people don't know how, you know, the people of the world are going to react. But the other one, of course, is that naturally authorities will want this technology for themselves to try to, you know, get one over basically on all the other powers of the world. So it's probably that they're also fighting to get the information so that they can learn before anybody else gets it, which is very depressing. But I imagine that the reason for the cover-up is a mixture of all these things, and indeed probably more, which I don't think we're ever going to fully know, but it won't be straightforward.
Okay. Mary?
One of the things that's been coming out this year, especially on that, what was it? It was Dr. Stephen Greer's presentation at the National Press Club in June, I believe. And what was coming out from some of those witnesses is that there is like a rogue government. It's a conglomerate of, I don't know, like corporations and this rogue element from the government. And they are doing really nefarious things. I mean, they create alien life forms that aren't real. They're involved with money-making projects like doing drugs, they're abducting people with these alien life forms that they've created. And then they use some of those people for slave trade, everything to gain power and control. So there is this rogue element that is a mixture of both multinational corporations and governmental organizations behind the scenes, not the ones we elect, but the ones that have control behind the scenes.
Yeah, I just want to interject for a second before I turn it over to you, Dr. Irena. Yeah, it's interesting. I watched a little documentary on, I believe it was the Canadian military a minister, I believe he was, and he was discussing also the underground bases that existed, you know, with the military complex in terms of connecting to actually the Project Paperclip after World War II, when I believe the Nazis were still, you know, having their own little power through Werner von Braun and operating in the Area 51 and creating a military complex in terms of taking control. And I think Eisenhower warned the government that they were getting out of hand, and soon that would be the people in control. So I found that very interesting in terms of underground bases, and some of the things that you just mentioned, Mary. I think it lends itself to that area. Working in the Defense Intelligence Agency, obviously it's a two-way street, a double-edged sword, I'm sure, having to have had the clearance, but also your own personal sense of self-discovery and your own mind in terms of what you might have interpreted or what you were allowed to interpret. And being in this position, is there things you can speak of in terms of your personal feelings on what exists and why there's a cover-up?
Well, a couple of years ago, I wrote an article on disclosure that was published in the MUFON Journal. And today they're talking about disclosure, but actually there was a disclosure. I think it was 1953. And I worked at Battelle, and I knew people there. And Project Blue Book was going on then. And Project Blue Book was sort of debunker things, saying, if somebody saw a UFO landing in their yard, an authority would come in and say, well, you just saw Venus, and those aliens you see wandering around are animals, and, raccoons or something. And so, but what was published there was called the Pinnacle Memo. And that was where it was right before the Robertson panel, where the Robertson panel said UFOs don't exist. And it was a big panel of UFOs like they have today. But they said there's no such thing to it. Well, they were supposed to use material from a Battelle study. And the people, several of the big honchos of Battelle wrote a memo that said, we're not ready to give our information to you, to the Robertson panel, because we haven't analyzed it yet. And somebody at Battelle, probably a high person, managed to get that out to here and there to different people, which disclosed that even though Project Blue Book was saying there's nothing to it, they were having Battelle do a secret study that they were financing, studying UFOs. And so that just showed, how hypocritical they are. But hardly anybody knew about it, because Battelle isn't something you know about and all that. But that was a real good disclosure. And it disclosed a lot of things, such as that the government was lying. And it's concrete. It's something you can definitely say it exists. And I knew the people. And another person, I speculated on who might have been the whistleblower. And I don't know, I was wondering if it might have been somebody really high in Battelle, because the person had to be able to try to get the thing out in different channels. But it showed that the government had this Robertson panel and Blue Book to debunk UFOs, while at the same time they were lying about it, and they were doing a study to try to figure out what they were.
Yeah.
And actually financing it and everything.
I think Mary mentioned to me once in an interview, which I found very interesting, as it related to Werner von Braun at NASA. I think you had mentioned regarding the employees that work there, and in terms of many people, I think you discussed this in terms of the look of the female employees, or in terms of what the information that they were able to pass on. And so there was
that's the story of Bill Tompkins. And he worked at the top level directly for Werner von Braun. And he talked about these lovely, attractive secretaries that worked at NASA at the time he was there. And it took him a while, but they were very attractive ETs. And we actually got our space program launched very, very quickly. When you think about, we really started from base zero. And he said that these ETs would provide them just the right of information that they needed at whenever they were getting stumped. And I'm pretty sure that's what you're referring to.
Yes, I am. I thought that to be very interesting. Andy, in terms of crop circles, in terms of the insight or the symbolization of what it means, how do we know what's real of a crop circle, or how can we tell if it's man-made? Is there a way of a person gathering that information?
Andy, if you don't know, I know.
Listen, what I've discovered in my 3 decades of research is that there's no absolute litmus test if you're just looking at physical evidence, that there are certainly indications. One thing that I have noticed over the years with known man-made crop circles that were made for television programs or whatever is that there's a lot of breakage on the plants, a lot of damage. The crop tends to be very just sort of flat, not really much more to it. But many of the other formations, let's call them that are really hard to explain. They're often layered, they're woven together in ways you cannot see how that could have been done manually, and there is an absence of that kind of damage. So you've got that, but on top of it, you've got incredible, exquisite geometry that is often not there in the man-made formations. You know, they might look reasonable to the eye, but when you start to compare like for like, you realize that they're on another level that lacks the sophistication. You've got all of that, and then you've got evidence of biological anomalies occurring in the plants. There have been a number of experiments over the years looking at that. I am personally comfortable that they were correct, that they were showing changes occurring in the plants that you cannot replicate when you're just manually flattening it down. You've got eyewitnesses, and then you put, you know, all the testimony in. I've interviewed over the years quite a few people who have claimed to have been present when a crop circle appeared in front of them, usually within seconds, and I see no evidence that those people are lying. They've got no reason to make this up. They've got everything to lose because all they ever get is ridicule when they come forward with their stories. So when you put all of that together, to me, it's pretty clear that there is a real phenomenon. Some are man-made. Nobody denies that. But I think there's increasingly a feeling that does it even matter that much? Depends whether you think what is being communicated is, you know, very right and very sort of depthy from the other ones, and whether the man-made formations kind of corrupt the code. Or there's another view that what they all do is actually make people think, and that in the end, some people believe people have been guided to make them so that the people up there don't have to do all the work. So there is another view on that, that actually the whole lot just meld together and you're still left with something that moves people and inspires people. But for all of that, yeah, I think to me it's clear that there is a phenomenon that's never been fully explained. And I don't think it ever will be, because we had a great big debunk back in 1991, shortly after I got involved, and everybody said it was these two elderly gentlemen making them. Well, that was a long time ago. The crop circles have not stopped. They've been dead for years, long gone. And the same discussions continue on. And in my view, that is sure evidence of a phenomenon like UFOs that is not straightforward, that will never be fully debunked, because there is something real there at the core.
Yeah.
There's two things, Andy, that have stayed with me forever since I learned about the crop circles. One was they have actually gotten films, and I know you know about this, where there's like a ball of light that quickly moves around a field and the crop circle forms like almost instantaneously. I find that very convincing. Another thing is when I learned about how the nodules expand in the grain, and then they bend without breaking. That's not a natural phenomena either. And for some reason, those two things have stood out in my mind as some really interesting confirmation that they're made by somebody other than humans down here on the earth.
Yeah, I mean, the biological anomalies, you know, we could spend a long time discussing it. You're right. And that's just one of a number of changes they found inside circle affected crop that is not replicated in man-made formations. The videos showing crop circles appearing under balls of light, there's one very well-known one. What's interesting about that is that is now 27 years ago. That was in the mid-90s when, you know, computers at home are not what they are today, long before deep fake technology and all of that. And it's never been adequately explained. People have tried to say it was a hoax. There's no direct evidence for that. And it seems strange to me that all these years later, if somebody had faked that using earlier computer technology, that they've never definitively claimed it and come out and shown that. And I myself have actually seen those balls of light on other occasions. So I know for a fact the balls of light really are there. And I was present with a small group of people. We all saw the same thing, and many other people have seen those lights. And some of the videos of the lights, if not a formation appearing under them, were often taken when lots of people were present. And that's now the key, you know, because, yeah, you can fake any piece of video. But in the end, if you've got enough eyewitnesses who all saw it with their own eyes, it's going to be very hard just to say that that was fake. That's still what the skeptics say, of course. But as we know, a skeptic will always find a way of explaining anything away. And you get to a point where it's not even worth discussing the evidence with them. You have to reach out to more open-minded people in the hope that we can get a proper conversation going.
Yeah, on that note, it's interesting because maybe you can concur or disagree with the fact that certain people see certain things and others don't. I remember sitting on the beach 2 years ago, and as I looked to the right, I saw a disc. It hovered for about maybe 10 seconds, and then it took off on a 45-degree angle up into the clouds. If I would have asked anybody if they saw it, they would have told me, I don't know what you're talking about. They were looking at the ocean. But for me, I was drawn right to my right side to look up. And it was an interesting phenomenon. And then that winter to see a blue flash over the car in the middle of the winter that looked like a Roman candle about 20, 30 feet above my car. And so the question that I ask is are there certain people that are directed towards this encounter, or are there certain people that are not? And if they are, what is the reason? Does anybody have any input on that?
I mean, I'll just briefly say that I think you're right, and I think some people are more attuned to this than others. I mean, another phenomenon that I've studied over the years is ghosts. And again, I've had my own experience with that. But it seems to me that some people are tuned to see them and others are not. And you can have a house where a lot of strange activity occurs, for instance, and the family can't deal with it. They've all seen stuff. In the end, they leave, a new family moves in, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And it's like whatever was there is suddenly gone inactive. They can leave and a new family come in and it all starts again. So I think that we either tune into things or something else is tuning into us. And I believe that's the same with a lot of paranormal phenomena. And like the balls of light, we know they're there. There's enough video showing they are visually there. It isn't just a trick of the mind. And yet, I do think there are other areas whereby, yeah, some people maybe can see other frequencies or whatever, others cannot. So, there are certainly people, for instance, that will walk into a crop formation and have incredible feelings inside them. They might feel good, they might feel bad, but it's something really odd. Feels like electricity tingling through them. The person next to them doesn't feel anything.
Right.
So, you know, we are very complex creatures, and life is subjective for us. So I definitely think some people will have these experiences, others less so, which is very annoying because, of course, you want to show everybody, but maybe not everybody will be attuned to it, even if you led them to the very place where this kind of thing normally happened. It may not work like that.
Dr. Irena, you've had some encounters that you've expressed and shared in other interviews, specifically the time when your sister and you were on in Boston, I believe it was, in that specific triangular area that you had mentioned, and you were encountered with a person who in some way dissuaded you from not looking in the direction of an alien ship that was hovering over, I guess, Logan's airport. Am I correct?
No, it was a little airport called Norwood Memorial Airport.
Yeah. Maybe you could just share a little bit about that story in terms of what you felt and the reasons behind it, or what you got out of it, if you did.
Yeah, I was working for the DIA at that time, and I was in aircraft identification. So I was right in that field, and I should have been able to identify aircraft. And my sister and I was in Washington, D.C., and she was in New Jersey, right beside New York. And we were on the east end of the country. And so we were going up to just take a vacation and go see the New England states. And so I picked up some coworkers and drove to New York, took pictures of them and my sister and her dorm and everything. And we went on up to Boston, and we were going to stay overnight, but it was late and we went light. And we drove up to New Hampshire, and I think we were in some of the area where the Hill abduction took place. We didn't know at the time. We came back to Boston looking for a place to stay, and we couldn't find one, so we were going to go around the outer belt and look. And as we were leaving Boston, there was an airport to the south, which is the Norwood Memorial Airport. And we could see airplanes coming in and landing, and like they'd have the red and green lights and the strobe lights and landing lights and everything, just normal airplanes and normal air traffic, and we could see it to our south. Well, below that was another thing. It was a light that was real white. There were no other lights with it. It was very slowly blinking, and it was very, very white. And it was below the aircraft. It looked like it was following Route 95, which is the main north-south freeway in the US. And my sister began to say she thought it might be a UFO. And I I was in science, and so I just said, oh no, it can't be that. It's a helicopter blinking its lights and everything. And so she kept saying, no, it looks funny. And she has real good eyesight. She's a bird watcher and see little tiny feathers on something a mile away, whereas I can't. But anyway, we drove around long and we were arguing. And then, but I mean, it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before either, but I didn't admit it. But we got on 95. We were heading south, and there was a woods on the side of the road. And in the woods, I saw this ball that looked like it was a glass ball, and there was a light on the inside, and it was going through different shades of red and blue, all different shades, red and then purple and then blue and then purple and so on. And there seemed to be some kind of a thing that was sort of going around. I had no idea what that was. And then the inside of our car lit up in green. And I looked around all over, and I couldn't imagine why the inside of the car was green, because I didn't see green anywhere. And I think if I'd seen green inside somebody else's car, I'd have known it. And the ball of light, whatever it was, wasn't green. And so anyway, we kept on driving, and we were still arguing about the thing that, she was saying looked like a UFO. And so finally, I was disagreeing with her and telling her she was crazy. And so finally, she just started screaming at me and said it was going to go over the road. Well, she screamed and screamed. So finally, I decided to pull over and stop. And I rolled down the window. I was going to point to her and say, see, that's a helicopter. You're crazy, and so on. And I pointed at it, and I saw a meteor way off in the distance. And then this thing came over the road, and it was it wasn't a blimp or anything like that, because we've seen blimps with lighted sides and all kinds of things like that. It was real low, and it had a row of 7 windows. When we saw it then, they were square windows. They weren't like airplane windows. They were square, just a row. And then on one end was a little blue light, a little green light, and one end was a red light that didn't blink. The windows, or whatever they were, looked like 2 chambers. It looked like there was a pattern of, like, the first 3 lights would blink on and off, then all 7, and then 4, and then go through the cycle again. Well, we looked in it, and we discussed, is this panels or windows? And we both thought it was a window, but there was nothing inside. It was just like all the walls were glowing, and just real white light inside. And so anyway, I was working in photography for the DIA, so I knew about photography. And I'd taken some other pictures with a regular camera, but I also had a Polaroid with me and high-speed film. But I had to find the film and the camera. And so I finally found them and loaded the film in the camera. I forgot to mention, my sister later had written it up, and she had said that right when we stopped, there was a blue light inside the car, or a strange blue light. And I hadn't seen that, but I was by the window. That was about the same time I thought I saw the meteor, though. And anyway, then I got my camera ready, and I could just take this beautiful picture of this thing real close, definite, and maybe get some freeway and get 2 or 3 pictures in stereo and just have a fantastic picture to prove UFOs exist, for all I knew. And this truck driver pulled over in front of us and stopped and came back. And I thought, oh, we're going to have another witness. And he came up to me and he said, what are you doing? And I thought this was a strange question, because this thing was up there and I was trying to photograph, and I was just ready to take the picture when he came, but I was scared of him, so I didn't take the picture. And so I pointed at it and said, what's that? Because I didn't want to say UFO, somebody along the road. And so anyway, he turned around in the opposite direction, just exactly the opposite direction, looked the same altitude, and said, I don't see anything. So I was spooked, and he turned around and looked at me again. And then he said, what are you doing? And I pointed again. And he rotated around the opposite direction, looked up, said, I don't see anything. Then he turned back to me and gave me some gesture. It was like he was pointing to his head, like he was telling me I was crazy or didn't seeing it. And then he went back to his truck. Well, by that time, my sister and I didn't see each other for about 5 years afterwards, and we didn't discuss it too much. But when she wrote up her report, she said that it took me a very long time to take the picture. And so finally she found something she just wrote up that day, the next day. And I asked her, "Did you see that man?" And she said, "No." And she was standing right beside me, but she might have been so concentrating on trying to see in the window that she didn't know what was going on, but I don't know. But
What
then,
did he look like?
it was dark, but he just looked like a regular man. He didn't have any New England accent or anything.
How was he
And
dressed?
I don't know.
No.
I wouldn't have been able to tell him again, but I did manage to get a picture, which I published in Scientific Journal. But then when we left, we were going to go and turn around and come back and look at it. He chased us in the truck. And if we changed lanes, he changed lanes. If we slowed down, he did the same thing. I thought he was going to kill us. I thought this was the end for us. And the way I got rid of him was I went on the left-hand lane as fast as I could go. And then when I came to an intersection, I turned off real sharply. And that was a real dangerous thing to do because somebody's going faster on the right-hand lane, we got killed. But we survived it and came back. And it was doing this stunt of circling the airport then in a real strange way. And then it headed off and we followed it, and we followed it eventually down this really bad road, country road. And we couldn't keep up with it. So finally we went back to New York. And then I went back later, the next day I went back to Washington and had a poltergeist experience, which is pretty creepy. And then everything became normal. And so it was sort of weird because I just found out this year that my sister didn't see the man and didn't know he was there. She knew he was, she remembered him following us in the truck, but she didn't remember anything about speaking to him. And I think I knew that to start with because I wanted to climb up a hill to get a better picture. And she tried to prevent me from climbing up the hill. And I kept telling her, "You have to protect the car from this man." And she didn't know what I was talking about then, but I still thought, oh, she knew what he was. But she wasn't aware of him. So one of us saw him and one of us didn't. And I always wondered if he was real or not real or something the UFO put in my mind. But I have a better answer now than I ever had before because I think it did something to us. It either erased her memory of it or made me see something. I mean, I don't know which.
Most likely erased hers.
Yeah.
I don't know. But if it did, it just erased it right immediately.
The interesting. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that raises another point because many people who've had incredible UFO encounters, and I've met many people over the years who have, many unknowns, but also people like Travis Walton, Bud Hopkins, people like that I've met over the years. What strikes me is that I think very often there is a multidimensionality to these experiences. We see things in 3D in normal world. I think very often with a UFO encounter, they exist on more than one level. And I think you can get almost brought into that. Maybe you were and your sister wasn't, and that what you're seeing, it's partly in our physical reality, but also partly not. And that again is why perhaps some people who are attuned to it will have an experience, will see something, and others will not. And whether this is done deliberately to confuse or whether this is simply the way it is, there's a lot of evidence of UFOs flitting in and out of other realities. They're not just going from A to B here in our reality. They're leaping to other dimensions all the time. It may be that some people can get pulled into that for a while. Entities will come from that, like the man that you saw. But if you're not on that frequency, you won't have that same experience. I think it's all far stranger than I think we often think it is, and I found that a really fascinating tale. So thank you for sharing that, Irena.
Well, my sister just found that this happened way back in 1968, but my sister just found that letter last year. And so I had always wondered, is this man real or not? And I finally asked her recently, and she said, no, she didn't remember anything, didn't know what I was talking about, but she did see him chase her car. So she was that much aware of him.
Yeah. The concept of visitations and abductions. I know, Irene, you've written a recent book on the subject, Pascagoula abduction.
Pascagoula.
Okay, I didn't know how to pronounce it, but
Ghoul.
yeah, and so I find that interesting. I mean, from the time of Betty and Bonnie Hill being abducted, from my experience, I got interested in the subject when I was in New Hampshire in the town where they got abducted. I had no clue or idea, and I told my girlfriend, I said, something happened in this town. And then sure enough, I look it up in a little town of where the abduction took place and where they have the commerce sign of the Betty and Bonnie Hill abduction. It was fascinating to me to the fact that we are being contacted and what exactly is being taken place. And as you mentioned, the different, depending upon your vibrational level in terms of what you'll perceive or your level of perception of what somebody else could bring upon you in terms of the encounter, as you experienced or your sister experienced a different reality or a memory erase. Mary, you've written about Bigfoot, which is more on an earthly plane and what exists on this planet right now that's living with us, as well as I'm sure aliens and different entities in different places as well. Maybe you could just talk about a little bit about some of the stories that you've heard from people who've had encounters that are interesting.
For some reason, humankind, or an awful lot of us humans, like to be scared, and they like the stories about scary Bigfoot. And with the research I've done at Skyships Over Cachers, we had a lot of interactions with the Bigfoot, but they were good ones. And the book that I did about Bigfoot reveals the humanity, the human side, and I mean that in a good way. It could be taken as an insult today, but the more human side of the Bigfoot. And they have families, and they're intelligent, and they have language, and there's just some really nice, touching stories. And as a preview, next week I'll be posting another one of those stories, again from a military guy, but where he really bonded with a Bigfoot during the explosion or eruption of the Mount St. Helens volcano. And it's just touching. It's like it's kind of like a love story. And anyhow, I choose to focus on the gentle side of the Bigfoot.
Yeah,
Mary, can I ask you, I mean, in your view, is Bigfoot, and there's similar, the Sasquatch and even the Yeti, there's a number of strange creatures. In your view, do they live firmly in our physical reality, or, as some have suggested, they themselves are coming and going into other dimensions? What's your feeling about that?
My feeling has evolved. I have the newspaper background, so I really started with my feet on the ground, and these are real creatures, and they are. I mean, I've seen I've seen them in a very physical way. But the more I talk to people who have had real close, long-term interactions with the Bigfoot, they talk about them being able to go into other dimensions and disappear before your eyes. And one of the reasons that we can't get photos of them very often is because they don't want their photos taken, and their energy can blur it out, or they can just vanish, so you can't get them. So I am much more open to the idea that they have this other dimensional quality than I did at the very beginning of my exploration.
I was on a tour in the Everglades a couple of weeks ago. When the boat rider, I was sharing with him if he ever saw anything, in the sky. We were talking about UFOs, UAPs. He said, interestingly enough, when he was in Lake Erie, or actually in Cleveland, Ohio, in the Ohio region, he was hanging out with his friends one evening. They were sitting around a campfire having a few drinks, but nonetheless, they were near a farm, and all of a sudden the cows started running in the middle of the night, and between them was a Bigfoot he felt running between them and hiding his footprints as he passed by, and they all got a clear glimpse of the face and the body. And so it was a very fascinating story. You know, he obviously is not going to tell somebody who didn't bring up the story itself, but to hear that was interesting. Many of you have written books on the subject that we're discussing, which is pertinent to your expertise or your area of interest. Andy, maybe you could share your most recent book, what it's about, and what it entails.
So the book, The New Heretics, it's an attempt to try to step away from the polarization that we're seeing, not only within the alternative research world, but also in the outer world. You know, everything's, you know, it's left versus right, it's good versus evil, it's man versus woman. It's constant polarization all around us. And in our world, we have this a lot. It's total skepticism. Some people then go to total belief, and there's no nuance. You lose something in the middle there. And I've tried to share in the book that there are ways we can approach investigating mysteries and cover-ups and conspiracies where you don't need to become divided and polarized, because that has destroyed so many truth groups over the years in very unhelpful ways. And I've tried to forge a way here forward where actually you can disagree with somebody, but you can then find what you do agree with and then move forward on that basis. It does take some practice. It does take some doing, but it can be done. And in the book, I mean, I describe my own background, you know, with the division and the polarization that I found in the crop circle world, in the UFO world. We all know there's polarization there where everybody's fighting for their idea only instead of saying, well, hold on, maybe that's just my perception. That is my truth, but I hear maybe you have your own truth there as well. So it was an attempt to distill that, but also make a case to the outside world that, look, you may be taught that we are all wrong, but you need to hear us out. You need to hear the evidence as well, because you have been polarized to believe we are all crazy, that we are all frauds or dangerous people. And actually, when you step back and you look at the evidence, that's not where it's at. You don't have to agree with somebody all the way through, right, to understand that maybe they have a viewpoint that has a right to be shared. And certainly what I'm finding now is that we do not have the right to share our views. And the New Heretics, it makes a plea that if you don't allow people to share what matters to them, even if you don't agree with it, what you're doing is generating extremism, because it pushes it down and down and down until the people who are being suppressed have to do extreme things to be heard and seen. So if you don't want extremism in the world, then this is the wrong approach. The mainstream media, authorities at the moment, they're just trying to push it down and down. It doesn't work. And that's why interest in these kinds of areas hasn't gone away, and why a belief in a global conspiracy is going up and up, because the more they try and suppress, it doesn't actually even work. So we need to step back from polarization, you know, embrace the gray areas in the middle of many of these things, and many of the things we're talking about tonight, but other areas as well that we haven't gone into that are more, you might say, conspiracy related. We need to find what are the common points that we can agree on. Let's find the nuance. Let's accept there are gray areas. We may never prove that we're all right, but equally, you know, you may never prove that we're all wrong. Let's get the evidence on the table and share it fairly and sensibly. And so, I mean, I'm pleased to have had many reactions back from the book saying that I actually have managed to achieve that for at least some people. It's given them a new way to look at these things and not get so divided, because as we all know, when we are divided, we're more easily controlled. It's an old trick. It's been going on since time began, and that divide and rule, we need to step back from that and not fall into that trap of polarity.
Yeah, well, I think with deliberation, in terms of divide and conquer, is a great way of creating a polarity and having people not learn or expand, in terms of keeping people stuck in a similar pattern to what they're accustomed to. Mary, your book, Spy in the Sky, in terms of what it exposes and the information, maybe you could just share with the audience a little bit about
I
that.
just briefly touched on things that I found in on Mars. I mean, there's spaceships, there's like a habitat that looks like it's contemporary. I found 27 entrances into Mars, all in a line spread out over 16 miles. Those are not ancient entrances, but that's not the only thing. I found, I'll give you one example. When I did my exploration in Antarctica, I'm finding that ancient cities are emerging from the melting ice. The ice is melting really quickly. They've hit like 65 degrees in their summertime, or whatever the warm season is. And most scientists say that that continent's been covered in ice for about 34 million years. That means these are the oldest structures in the world. Again, I have before and after pictures. Why are they trying to hide history from us? So those are the kind of things I get into.
Thank you.
And it's called Spy in the Sky, and it's on Amazon. And if you go there, I'm sure you can find links to the other 4 books that I have.
Yeah, I'll put all your links up in the description. And Dr. Irena, you wrote a book, Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, co-authored. I didn't get the name of the Pascagoula abduction correct, so you'll correct me again, I'm sure. And maybe you could just elaborate on what the book is about in terms of this abduction.
Co-authored by Philip Mannel. It was basically about these 2 perfectly normal people who had no interest in UFOs or anything, and they went out fishing, and they were abducted. And unlike many people, they consciously remembered it. The older man wanted to report it, the younger man didn't, but they did report it immediately afterwards. They were questioned immediately afterwards by the police department. The police wanted to find out if they were telling the truth or not. They put them in a room with a hidden tape recorder and discovered that the men were just falling to pieces in shock because it was right after it happened. And it made news all over the world. It was very well investigated. What they reported, the beings were a lot different from anything else people had reported. And then they've investigated later, and our investigation included, there were a lot of other reports that night, and usually abductions seem to take place in secret, in hidden places, and people don't remember them. Well, these are remember them. And there were other witnesses, and we found a lot of other witnesses for even the same time that saw a UFO. And there was even a possible abduction by people that were close by and maybe saw the abduction too. So there was a lot more documentation that people didn't know about it. And it was a real unique event anyway.
Yeah, but what makes it stand out from other abductions?
Well, usually they're kind of hidden and nobody reports them if they don't even remember them. These remember them, reported immediately, were investigated immediately. And there were a lot of other witnesses, which never happens. Any of those things happen. And other ways to document that something happened. Yeah. And abductions are even talked about. You know, they have these hearings and things. Well, they don't say anything about abductions, but there was some documentation for this.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so all 3 of you share an interesting story in terms of in a different way and a different direction in some aspects. But in terms of the desire to reveal information that is hidden or not in the public's eye is inspirational and motivating. As we move forward from here, maybe each one of you could just leave us with some type of message of how we can embrace this information that you've shared. If a person chooses to, obviously it's a choice. But if a person is interested, how do they embrace this? What is the process? I guess it's an individual process, but is there some type of way that a person opens themselves up to this? Maybe anybody want to share?
Well, I mean, I
like
would
leaving
say that
leaving a message. You can leave a message
Yeah.
in terms of as we close.
Well, I would say that everybody needs to share their truth and stop being afraid of what other people might think. We've lived for too long being told we should feel ashamed if something strange has happened to us or we've had a peculiar encounter, whatever it is. We need to speak our truth. I meet many people at my lectures who've stayed quiet all their lives about incredible events, but because I've just stood up and spoken about them on a platform, they'll come and share them with me. We all need to stop being afraid and put this stuff out out there and accept that there is an everyday world of the paranormal, all kinds of experiences, and indeed there are layers going on in the world that are clearly, if you just look at them for 10 minutes, there. Let's stop pretending they're not there. Let's get it out in the open and stop condemning people for having views that do not fit the orthodoxy. And the way that we can counteract that is to speak our truths loudly, clearly, never force anyone to agree with you. Just say, I'm sharing this because this is my truth. And if everybody did that, well, we'd be getting a lot further forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm going to be real practical. Use Google Earth. In the book, I give coordinates so people can start from where the things that I have found and start finding the evidence for yourself. And that's so important because there are so many blankety blank people who get a kick out of creating false realities with Photoshop. And so if you can find things for yourself, you're going to be much more open to the possibility that this is something very real. So that's just some real practical advice.
Thank you, Mary. And Irena, would you like to share anything and like a message you want to leave us with, or some type of insight you want to share that I didn't bring up?
Be open-minded. Don't laugh at people, because you could be going through your normal life and wham, something might happen to you. So just be open-minded and listen. If people sound sincere, they may be.
Yeah. So in terms of having all three of you here, I want to thank you for the I would say not the courage, but the ability to be authentic, to be yourself in terms of being in touch with all aspects of the polarization that exists within each one of us, in terms of being able to find a place that's a middle ground, so to speak, of not fully committing, but being in a more rational state of acceptance and understanding. Because I think when you go to one side of an extremity, you wind up losing your reality. And I think that's exactly as you mentioned, Andy, in terms of what is being done to us, that we polarize ourselves so that we lose the reality of the middle ground, the balance or the equilibrium. In terms of going forward with these subjects, hopefully in the future I'll be able to interview you individually. And at this moment, just I want to thank you for joining me and sharing your information. So if there's anything anybody else wants to add or say, if not, we'll close.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us here.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy.
Ditto.
Thank you very much.
All right. So thank you again, and I'll speak with each one of you. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.